Hey everyone, welcome back. Glad you're here. Want to spend a few minutes with you just talking about a topic that pastors, I imagine, struggle with in their leadership, and that is assumption. In fact, I like to call it assumption, the slow death of leadership. Too many times we get into our leading and we make a lot of assumptions, and it hurts us, it hurts those around us, and it makes it much more difficult when it shouldn't be that difficult to lead. There's several different types of assumptions, and I want to just hit a few of them, and hopefully this triggers in you. Oh yeah, well, I'm not only making an assumption like that, but I'm making an assumption like this. And we just walk through a few of these and maybe some solutions for you to move forward so that you can be the leader that you are trying to be as the pastor of your church or your ministry team or whatever group that you lead. So one of the first assumptions we make is that we assume those under us work as hard as we do. Oftentimes we got into the position because of how hard we work, and we have hired team members, or we have inherited team members, people that we're leading, and they don't have the same type of work ethic. It doesn't mean they don't work, they just don't do it the way we do it. And we feel this sense that nobody's working as hard as I am. And the way to be able to handle that is to step back and look at the things that the person is doing, and also check and make sure they've got everything they need to be able to step forward. We don't want to micromanage, but there are times where we need to make sure that they're staying on task. And it doesn't mean they need to be fired. It just means, okay, I've got to pay a little extra attention when I feel like they're not working as hard as I am, and ask good questions to see what it is that's keeping them from moving in the direction that you want them to move in terms of working. But when we just make the assumption that they're working as hard as we are, and then we look up and they're behind, or they've missed something, they've missed a deadline, it's just really difficult on us. So really make sure you're clear what you're wanting them to do, and that you're staying with them along the way, not where you're doing their job for them or enabling them, but you're asking the questions and moving them along. So another big assumption that we make is they know what I'm talking about. I may say what's needed, but I didn't articulate it as well as they needed to understand. Each of us have sets of filters that when communication comes in, it runs through. I like to look at it as the brain's like the computer, and all the folders now that you have for your files when you're working on documents or working on projects, and you have these folders and you know where they go, and they have topic names so that you know where you're putting your stuff. Well, each of us have a brain like that. And when I speak out what I'm expecting somebody to do, it falls into a folder that they have in their brain. And that folder might not actually match up with what my intent was for them in their task. So we need to ask questions of them as we give them the info. And don't just say, do you understand? Because sometimes they may think they do, but it's fallen into a folder that doesn't match up with what you're asking. So not only do you ask, do you understand? Tell me how you would implement it. Tell me how you're going to step into this. Repeat back to me what I just said, for I want to make sure that I've articulated this well. That's all it takes, just a little extra time to make sure they understood the way that you were presenting your information to them for them to move forward. So don't make the assumption they know what you're talking about, because their brain's working differently than yours, differently than the next person's, and you can't do it the same way with every single person. All of us have different file folders, different experiences that we tie these things to, and sometimes there's a blank folder, right? They don't really know, but they're going to say yes because they're afraid of being shamed. And you may have to do some training so that they understand what you're talking about when you give them instruction. Another big assumption we make is that they totally understand our vision and mission, both as our church, what our church vision and mission is, and within the group that we're together working this vision and mission of what we are about. Who are we and what do we do? That's real big on who are you and what do you do? And they don't always understand what that looks like. Don't make an assumption that they get it. They may not. There may have to be some conversations of, hey, tell me why we're not doing blank, because this is what we say we do. Tell me what's going on here. There must be a misunderstanding. There must be not enough communication from me for you to understand what that's about. And you might have to use examples, like you were assigned this task, and I thought that this was within what we said we would do as a church, but this doesn't look the same. So try to discover what's going on and where did I leave something out that didn't help them understand this is who we are and this is what we do. And you don't have to go into some major overhaul. It's just making sure everybody's on task with the same stuff together. Another big assumption is, and it's very similar to knowing what I'm talking about, them knowing what I'm talking about, is I said it, they understand. Since I said it, they ought to understand. Sometimes I've had bosses who would send me a one-sentence thing because they're in a hurry moving somewhere from A to B, and they don't want to forget, so they send this quick note, and I have no clue what this is referencing. So we have to be clear that we're referencing something, even if it's redundant. This is tied to the children's ministry that we had a meeting about 3 days ago. Where are we on blank? Rather than just dropping a one-liner in an email. And that's the next thing. Not only can we email or text, we should follow up with a conversation. In the old days, in the offices, there were memos, and then there were meetings, and then there were phone calls, and there were verbal conversations. And in the old business, memos were not enough. Memos had to be followed up with human interaction. Same is true now with texts and emails and instant messaging. We have to have some follow-up and make sure. Otherwise, they're not going to understand, and then they've wasted time. And now you're behind because you were waiting on something and they were wasting time. Make sure you're clear that they understand what you're looking for. Another big assumption that we make is that they are understanding my expectation. And really, honestly, our expectation's either unclear or unrealistic. And we get frustrated that they aren't meeting an expectation. And the key is, did I speak that expectation clearly? And did I tell them what are the things that it would take to meet that? Sometimes we get frustrated that they're not owning something, that they're not owning up to dropping short, falling short of the mark. And all they did, but it's not fully to us. That's in our expectation realm. There's an assumption that they're going to meet our expectation. And we didn't clearly speak the expectation, or it's unrealistic. We're looking at a person and expecting them to do something when they're not capable. They're not capable to meet that expectation. That doesn't mean they can't work for you. You just have to guide them and be very clear about your expectation and how that is supposed to turn out. And then also have grace, because there are times where you may have to add somebody to their team or add somebody alongside with them to help that expectation to be met. But don't make an assumption that they are going to meet your expectation without it being very clear to begin with. And then another assumption, the last one I want to cover here, is because they are in the position they are in, they are naturally motivated to do something. Because they work at the church, they ought to be happy all the time. They ought to be thrilled to be stepping into this work. They ought to be thrilled that but that's not always the case. They're not always as motivated, and we need to come along and help keep them motivated. And it's not just rah, rah, let's go get it. Sometimes we need to find out, hey, what's going on? What's sucking the life out of your motivation here? Maybe we've given them a task that doesn't really fit in their realm. It doesn't fit within their talent and their giftedness. And so we're trying to push string on something, and it's hard for them to be motivated. Don't assume just because they work at the church, don't assume because they, for the most part, love their job, that they're still fully naturally motivated. Sometimes we have to come alongside and find ways to motivate them. And I'm not talking about bribes. I'm talking about how gifted they are and how they could really flourish, because you see it when maybe they don't, because they might be believing lies. They may be struggling with some other things going on and their confidence is low. And that's our job to make sure that they stay motivated as best we can and not assume that they're just automatically going to step into that. All of these assumptions and so many more can be remedied through communication, through clarity, through communication, through asking them questions, making sure they understand, having them repeat it back to us so that they know what they've said. And when I say repeat it back to us, we don't need to be condescending with that. Repeat that back to me so I know you got it. See, that's condescending. But we could say, hey, could you repeat that back to me? I'm not sure if I've articulated it well enough. Right? I took the ownership. And then they're giving it back to me. Now I see whether or not they're understanding or they are meeting whatever the expectation or all of the other things that we talked about earlier. Right? Don't assume. Assumes will kill your leadership. And really, honestly, we want to point the finger at them when we're making the assumption, but really the finger needs to be at us. Were we clear? Did we communicate clearly, directly? Did we get mutual understanding? Do they understand us? Did we get a commitment out of them? If we just loosely throw it out there and assume they're going to do it, we got no commitment, we're 50% at least at fault. So really work on the assumption part of you. Where can I do this better so that I don't fall into that trap and do the spiraling slow death of following assumption? Thanks for spending time with me today. Hopefully this has been helpful. As always, you can set up a time with me if you want to visit about this or anything else, any other topics that we have. I'm always here to help pastors be better.